Is this the beginning of an unstoppable transformation? That question struck the public consciousness like a silent shockwave the moment the names Jungkook and Taehyung were once again bound within a single narrative, one that now feels profoundly different, more academic in its reading of signs, more dramatic in its emotional weight, and far more shocking than any rumor that has ever circulated before, and no one was truly prepared for this moment. Even fans who, for years, have claimed to understand the internal dynamics of BTS suddenly found themselves at a loss for words. What surfaced was not merely a new photo book, not simply a visual project by Kim Taehyung, but a signal of change so powerful that it triggered an unexpected reaction from one particular figure. Jungkook, long known for his adaptability and emotional intelligence, was rumored to be unable to believe the new direction Taehyung was taking. From that very point, a global conversation was ignited. On January 19, 2026, Kim Taehyung released his latest photo book titled Type Fay. From the outset, the title alone invited academic and semiotic debate. The character Fay, rooted in classical Chinese and used in Japanese kanji, carries meanings such as not, non-dash, or a rejection of what is considered standard or orthodox. This was not a neutral choice, nor was it an empty aesthetic decision. In cultural studies, the use of such a symbol is often interpreted as an ideological statement, and the public, especially ARMY, seemed to sense it simultaneously. Taehyung was rejecting something, or at the very least, distancing himself from an established framework. The photo book itself is far from a conventional collection of artistic images. It arrives with a cold atmosphere, extreme contrasts of light and shadow, and expressions that no longer appear eager to please anyone. Taehyung's gaze across several pages feels vacant yet piercing, as if challenging the viewer to interpret the meaning independently. The fashion choices stray from the classic idol image, leaning toward experimental silhouettes that oscillate between rigid masculinity and fragile androgyny. All of this provoked a question that echoed relentlessly across global timelines. Where exactly is Taehyung trying to take himself now? It is here that Jungkook's name enters the narrative, not through a formal statement, nor an interview, but through an absence that spoke volumes. In the study of public figure communication, silence often resonates louder than lengthy explanations. Jungkook, typically quick to offer explicit support for his members' solo projects, appeared unusually restrained. There were no spontaneous posts, no affectionate captions filled with emojis as fans had come to expect. For a fandom deeply attuned to BTS's digital body language, this was not a trivial detail. Was Jungkook truly unable to believe Taehyung's new direction, or was he simply processing something he had not yet fully grasped? The question grew more compelling as several observers of Korean pop culture began to interpret Type Fay as a marker of artistic identity transition. Within theories of creative development, this phase is often described as a period of disruption, when an artist intentionally dismantles their former image in order to discover a more authentic voice. Yet such phases are almost always accompanied by conflict, both internal and interpersonal. Taehyung has long been recognized as an intuitive, emotionally driven artist with a deep sensitivity to meaning. Jungkook, by contrast, is often perceived as a figure of balance, someone who navigates experimentation while maintaining structure. When one moves decisively toward uncertainty, it is only natural for the other to feel unsettled. This does not necessarily manifest as confrontation, but rather as a subtle emotional distance, quiet, restrained, yet unmistakable. What makes this moment especially emotional is the depth of their shared history. Jungkook and Taehyung are not merely groupmates. They grew up together under the same relentless pressures of the industry, transitioning from adolescence into adulthood with cameras perpetually rolling. In the psychology of long-term relationships, drastic change in one individual often triggers a crisis of meaning in another, not because of rejection, but because of a sense of loss toward a version of the person that once felt deeply familiar. Type Fay also sparked renewed discussion about Taehyung's relationship with BTS as a collective entity. Is this simply an extreme form of solo exploration, or does it signal a readiness to step further away from the group's shared identity? The question is undeniably sensitive, yet it is precisely this sensitivity that intensifies the emotional tension felt by the public. Jungkook, symbolically positioned as the gravitational center of BTS, becomes a focal point in this discourse. When he appears uncertain, the audience cannot help but wonder whether that center itself is shifting. Several media analysts have suggested that the title Type Fay does not merely reject a genre or aesthetic, but rather rejects expectation itself. Industry expectations, fan expectations, and perhaps even internal expectations among the members. Seen through this lens, Jungkook's seemingly hesitant response may represent a process of internal adjustment. He is not rejecting Taehyung. He is attempting to understand a version of Taehyung that is still unfolding. Within fandom spaces, however, such nuanced interpretations rarely emerge without turbulence. Speculation flooded timelines. Some declared this the beginning of an emotional rift. Others argued it was evidence of maturity, that BTS has reached a point where its members no longer need to mirror each other's reactions. Here, clickbait collides with psychological reality. What appears as disbelief may in fact be the reflection of a bond strong enough to withstand uncertainty. What is less frequently discussed is the intellectual and conceptual weight behind Taehyung's work. Several pages of the photo book include short textual fragments, resembling notes of existential philosophy. They speak of identity, rejection of labels, and solitude under constant observation. This is not the language of an idol seeking safety. It is the language of an artist prepared to be misunderstood. And not everyone, especially those closest, can immediately embrace such a language. Jungkook, known for his instinct to protect the group's harmony, may perceive the risks embedded in that choice. The risk of misinterpretation. The risk of public backlash. The risk of Taehyung standing alone against expectations that were never designed to be fair. The disbelief attributed to Jungkook may not be directed at Taehyung's artistry, but at the world that will inevitably judge it. Emotion deepens when fans begin to recall past moments, times when Jungkook openly described Taehyung as the most unpredictable, yet the most honest with his feelings. That old statement is now reread through a new lens. Has that honesty reached a point where it even surprises those closest to him? There's been no official confirmation, no denial. And it is precisely this ambiguity that fuels the power of the story. In an era where everything can be clarified in a single post, uncertainty becomes the most fertile ground for emotion. Type Fay is not merely a photo book. It is a mirror reflecting collective anxiety about change, about growth, and about relationships that must either adapt or fracture. Is this truly the beginning of a major transformation, or simply a phase that will ultimately strengthen BTS in ways no one has yet imagined? Jungkook may not fully believe in Taehyung's new direction, at least not yet. But history suggests that initial disbelief often becomes the doorway to deeper understanding. And now, the world waits with bated breath, not for quick answers, but for the emotional process quietly unfolding behind the scenes. The tension surrounding Type Fay did not fade in the days that followed its release. Instead, it grew heavier, more layered, as if the photo book had opened a door that could not be closed again. Conversations evolved from surface-level admiration into deeper, almost scholarly debates about intent, symbolism, and consequence. Fans were no longer just asking whether the images were beautiful or provocative. They were asking what they meant for Taehyung as an artist, for Jungkook as his closest counterpart, and for BTS as a cultural institution that has long represented unity in motion. What made this moment especially striking was how Taehyung himself chose not to explain. There were no lengthy captions clarifying his vision, no interviews carefully designed to guide interpretation. In the world of pop culture, silence from the creator often becomes an invitation, an open field where audiences project their own fears, hopes, and expectations. Taehyung's silence felt intentional, almost defiant, as though he were saying that meaning does not always need permission to exist. And yet, That same silence intensified the pressure on those around him, especially Jungkook, whose emotional transparency has long been a bridge between BTS and the public. Observers began to notice subtle shifts in Jungkook's demeanor during subsequent appearances. Nothing overt, nothing dramatic enough to warrant headlines on its own, yet enough to spark careful analysis. His tone was thoughtful, slower than usual. His words, when he spoke about creativity and the future, seemed weighted with contemplation. For fans accustomed to his instinctive warmth and immediacy, this shift felt significant. It was as if Jungkook were standing at a crossroads, aware that something fundamental was changing but still deciding how to meet it. In cultural theory, moments like these are often described as liminal. They exist between what was and what will be, defined more by uncertainty than resolution. Taehyung, through Type Fay, appeared to step fully into that liminal space, embracing ambiguity as both method and message. Jungkook, meanwhile, seemed to hover at its edge, not resisting, but not fully stepping in either. This dynamic, subtle yet powerful, resonated deeply with audiences who themselves are living in an era of constant transformation and instability. The emotional response from fans reflected this resonance. Some expressed pride, seeing Taehyung's work as proof that he had reached a level of artistic courage few idols ever achieve. Others admitted discomfort, not because the work lacked quality, but because it challenged the image they had grown attached to. Jungkook's perceived hesitation became a mirror for these mixed emotions. If even he needed time to process, perhaps confusion was not a failure of understanding, but a natural response to growth. As days turned into weeks, discussions shifted from speculation about conflict to reflections on evolution. Longtime followers of BTS began revisiting the group's early years, noting how change had always been part of their story. Each era had brought moments of doubt, both from within and outside the fandom, yet each time the group had emerged transformed rather than fractured. In this context, Type Fay started to look less like a rupture and more like a necessary fracture line, a place where pressure builds before something new takes shape. Jungkook's relationship with Taehyung, viewed through this lens, gained new emotional depth. Their bond was no longer framed solely as playful chemistry or mutual support, but as a relationship capable of holding tension without collapsing. In psychological terms, this is often seen as a marker of maturity. Relationships that endure are not those free from doubt, but those that can accommodate it. Jungkook's initial disbelief, rather than signaling rejection, may in fact indicate that the bond is strong enough to survive reinterpretation. The photobook's title continued to echo through these conversations. Type Fay as a declaration of not this, not as expected, not confined. For Taehyung, it seemed to articulate a refusal to be defined solely by what the world has already decided he is. For Jungkook, it may have posed a more personal question. If one part of the shared identity changes so radically, how does the rest adapt without losing itself? This question extends beyond individual members and touches the very foundation of BTS's global significance. The group has long been celebrated not just for its music, but for its narrative of collective growth. If that narrative is now entering a phase where individuality becomes more pronounced and less easily harmonized, the implications are profound. Fans are no longer just witnessing the evolution of idols. They are watching a case study in how collective identities survive individual transformation. Emotionally, this realization has been both exhilarating and unsettling. Exhilarating because it suggests honesty and artistic freedom. Unsettling because it removes the comfort of predictability. Jungkook's visible process of adjustment humanizes this transition. He is not presented as an all-knowing anchor, but as someone experiencing the same uncertainty as the audience, albeit from a far more personal vantage point. As time goes on, the sharp edges of the initial shock begin to soften. What remains is a quiet anticipation. Not the kind fueled by scandal, but the kind born from curiosity and respect. People are no longer asking when Jungkook will react, but how. Not whether Taehyung will explain, but what his next move will reveal. The story has shifted from confrontation to contemplation. In the end, Type Fay may be remembered not as the moment everything changed overnight, but as the moment change became undeniable. Jungkook's disbelief, whether real or perceived, becomes part of that story, not as a sign of division, but as evidence that transformation is rarely smooth, even among those who trust each other most. And perhaps that is the most powerful revelation of all. That behind the polished performances and carefully curated images, there are real individuals navigating growth in real time. That disbelief does not always mean rejection. Sometimes, it is simply the first step toward understanding something entirely new. The world continues to watch, not with the hunger for drama, but with the quiet awareness that something meaningful is unfolding. No clear conclusions have been drawn. No definitive statements have been made. Yet the emotional weight lingers, heavy and unresolved, suggesting that whatever comes next will not simply follow old patterns. That deep breath continues to hang in the air, stretching time in a way that feels unfamiliar, yet strangely fitting. In the absence of official explanations, every small gesture becomes meaningful, every silence layered with implication. Fans begin to notice how conversations around BTS subtly change in tone, less focused on synchronized perfection and more attuned to individual trajectories. It is as if Type Fay has quietly recalibrated the lens through which everything is now observed. Taehyung's presence, even outside the photo book itself, feels altered. When images or short clips surface, his expression seems more inward, less concerned with external validation. There is a sense of someone who has crossed an internal threshold, aware that turning back would mean denying something essential. This awareness gives his movements a gravity that resonates beyond aesthetics. It is not rebellion for shock value, it is a deliberate step into self-definition. And that, perhaps, is what makes it so unsettling. Authentic change rarely announces itself politely. Jungkook, meanwhile, occupies a different emotional frequency. He is not distant, yet not as effortlessly expressive as before. In moments where he speaks about music, about growth, about the future, there is a reflective quality that suggests careful recalibration. He appears to be listening more than speaking, absorbing rather than asserting. For someone long perceived as the emotional constant, this shift invites empathy. It reminds audiences that stability does not mean immobility. Sometimes, stability means knowing when to pause. Within this pause, a quieter narrative begins to emerge. It is no longer about whether Jungkook agrees with Taehyung's direction, but about how two individuals with shared history negotiate divergence without erasing connection. This is a story rarely told in idol culture, where unity is often presented as sameness. Here, unity looks different. It looks like trust stretched thin but not broken. It looks like respect expressed through restraint. Scholars of popular culture have long argued that the most enduring icons are those who allow themselves to evolve publicly, even at the risk of misunderstanding. In this sense, Type Fay can be seen as a pivotal text, not just within Taehyung's personal career, but within the broader narrative of BTS as artists navigating longevity. The group is no longer at the beginning of its ascent. It is in a phase where reinvention becomes a necessity rather than an option. For fans, this realization carries emotional weight. It asks them to shift from consumption to contemplation, from certainty to curiosity. Jungkook's journey through disbelief, processing, and quiet observation mirrors this shift. He becomes a conduit through which fans experience their own mixed reactions. In this way, his response, whatever form it ultimately takes, matters not because it validates or invalidates Taehyung's choices, but because it models how to sit with complexity.